The jungle breathed like a beast, thick humid air clung to her skin heavy with the scent of sap flowers and blood. The crash had torn her escape pod into pieces, flinging debris into the canopy and leaving a smear of scorched earth. Behind her now she staggered through the underbrush, her emerald green skin slick with sweat, her long silky grey hair matted and tangled with leaves. Something howled in the distance. She flinched, clutching the glowing gash on her leg, and pushed deeper into the unknown. She didn't know where she was, didn't know if anyone else had survived, didn't know the name of this savage, colourful world or the creatures that watched her from the shadows with glowing eyes. Her once elegant dress made of shimmering alien silk now hung in shredded pieces across her body, exposing the curves and scars beneath the ceremonial silver belt worn only by scholars of her class. Was the only thing left intact, a useless ornament from a world that suddenly felt centuries away. Branches shifted above, she froze their movement. Not an animal. Humanoid, tall, dark, painted skin, carrying spears tipped with bone and fire. Hardened stone. She gasped, stumbled backward into a flowering fern that clung to her ankle. More emerged, half a dozen, maybe more. Their skin was dark and rich like fertile earth, their hair braided, decorated with feathers, teeth and beads, their eyes sharp, calculating, watching her not with confusion, but with hunger. This is it, her heart pounded. She reached for the signal flare on her belt. Gone lost in the crash. One of the men took a step forward, tilting his head. He said something in a language full of deep clicks and smooth vowels. She didn't understand, she didn't care. She turned and ran. Branches whipped her face, thorns tore at her legs. A massive insect burst from a tree and scraped her shoulder with glassy wings. She didn't stop, didn't look back. A root snag her foot. She fell hard, slamming her ribs into a stone. The pain sent stars flashing through her vision. By the time she blinked, the tears away, they were around her. One of them crouched beside her. He was taller than the others, broad-shouldered, scarred, bare-chested, but regal like a king, made of iron and obsidian. He wore a necklace of carved ivory pieces and animal teeth, and a loose patterned wrap tied around his waist. His skin gleamed with sweat and war paint. His eyes were intelligent, too intelligent. He didn't smile, he didn't threaten, he simply watched her. She screamed and tried to crawl backward, but her wounded leg collapsed under her. The others murmured in their language, laughed softly. She understood the tone. If not the words, they were amused. She was a thing, a prize, a feast. The tall one raised his hand. The others fell silent. He stepped forward, knelt beside her, and reached out to touch her hair. She flinched, expecting pain. Instead, he tucked a vine from her tangled locks behind her ear. Gently, curiously, she stared at him in horror. They're inspecting the meat. I'm being sized up for cooking. She bit her lips so hard it bled. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, barely audible, please don't eat me. Of course they didn't understand, but the way the tall man's brow furrowed, he heard the fear with strength that felt effortless. He lifted her into his arms. She was too weak to resist, too scared to scream. The group turned and began walking, carrying her deeper into the jungle, into the unknown, into what she was certain would be the end of her story. They were going to eat her, and she wouldn't even die on her feet. She closed her eyes as the jungle swallowed her whole, but before she blacked out, before the heat of the day overwhelmed her again, she felt something strange. Warmth, the hand around hers, not tight, not cruel, just present, holding her like something worth protecting that made no sense at all. The world came back in pieces, heat, leaves rustling, faint bird song, something sweet and smoky in the air, and pain, always pain, a dull through in her leg, her side, her chest. She opened her eyes slowly. The sky above was a canopy of leaves so green at her to look at, shafts of golden light sliced through them, catching on blue mist and glowing pollen. She wasn't in a cage, she wasn't tied up. She was lying on a raised platform made of wood and woven vine, covered in soft leaves and strange moss that shimmered slightly. They were nearby, moving, talking, laughing, cooking. Humans, at least a dozen, all of them tribal, bare feet, beaded jewelry, patterned cloth wraps and feathered armbands. Their skin glistened in the heat, their eyes darted like hunters, sharp, alert, assessing. They carried spears, blades of bone, tools she didn't Recognized children ran between them. One stopped, stared at her with wide eyes. Then ran off again. She sat up with a gasp. Pain stabbed through her side. She winced and looked down. Her wound was cleaned. Her leg was bandaged with some kind of thick plant fiber. Her ruined dress had been patched with cloth, clearly not her own. She smelled of oil and smoke and herbs they had tended to her. That didn't change the facts. She was in their village among warriors. Surrounded, alone, still sure of one thing: they were just waiting. Fatten her up, heal her enough to walk, then cut her open and see what alien flesh tasted like. Her pulse quickened. She scanned for an escape route. Then she saw him. He sat apart from the others, just at the edge of the central fire pit, kneeling, sharpening a long wooden spear with a careful rhythmic motion. His face was unreadable, calm, focused, almost serene. No hunger in his eyes, no amusement, no malice, just thought. He looked up once, sensing her gaze. Their eyes met. She flinched, but he didn't leer, didn't approach, didn't smile. He just gave the smallest of nods, then returned to his spear. A few minutes later, he brought something to her: a bowl of thick stew, steaming, made with roasted root vegetables, herbs, and something that smelled almost like citrus. She tensed. He crouched beside her platform and held it out, not pushing, not forcing, waiting. She stared at it like a trap. He said something in his own language, quietly, gently. She didn't understand a word, but his tone was patient. When she didn't take the bowl, he slowly set it down beside her, then from his own pouch pulled a smaller bowl and drank from it. The same stew. He looked at her again, not smiling but calm, then stood and left. She waited until he was gone, then sniffed the stew. It smelled too good. Her stomach twisted in betrayal. With shaking fingers, she sipped warm, savory, spiced, not poison, not drugged, just food. She watched him for hours from her platform. He worked with the other men, lifted heavy stones, helped with repairs, carried water, but never once laughed at her, never stared, never treated her like a trophy. She noticed the others respected him too. They listened when he spoke. Even elders seemed to defer. Was he a chief, a hunter, or something else? But he was still human, still part of the tribe, still part of the group that had taken her. And yet, why did he feel different that evening as the jungle turned violet and the sky bled orange behind the trees? She sat huddled in the corner of the platform. Her wounds throbbed, her head spun. Children danced by the fires, drums thumped gently, and he came again, this time with a flask made of leather, water cool and sweet. He handed it to her in silence. She took it. Their fingers brushed for a moment. She didn't recoil, and he didn't stare. He just nodded once more and walked away. He doesn't want to hurt me, she thought, confused. But then what does he want? She fell asleep with the question echoing in her head. Not a prisoner, not food, but not free. And the tall one, the one with the sharp eyes and patient hands, watched her not like a predator, but like someone waiting for her to understand something he couldn't say. And in her dreams, for their first time since crashing into this world, she didn't run, she wasn't locked up, she wasn't chained, and no one touched her unless it was to change her bandages or bring her food. That fact should have been comforting, but to her it was terrifying. Why weren't they treating her like a prisoner? Why weren't they doing anything at all? No taunts, no threats, just kindness from her platform beneath the towering flower-lace trees. She watched the tribe go about their lives. The village thrived in a natural rhythm. Hunters returned with meat wrapped in vine-woven satchels. Children played with carved bone figures. Women ground seeds and painted cloth with pigment from their jungle. Their society wasn't primitive, was just different, balanced, wild, and beautiful. But always her eyes found him, the tall one, the one who didn't laugh with the others, the one who moved with silent confidence. He didn't bark orders, didn't speak much at all, yet when he walked past, people gave him space. Even the elders nodded in respect. She still didn't know his name. He hadn't spoken a word. She understood, but he kept coming back with food, with water, sometimes with clean cloth. He never asked for anything in return. That confused her more than anything. One morning when he approached with water, she didn't take it. She looked him in the eye and turned her head away. He paused, waited, set the flask gently Beside her then backed away, not insulted, not angry, just quiet. That night she drank every drop. On the third day, he came with a bundle of steaming leaves and strange paste. She tensed as he knelt beside her. He looked at her bandaged leg, then at her face, paused, raised his hand slowly and gestured a "May I?" She hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. He unwrapped her bandage gently. Steam hissed from the wound. She winced, but not because of pain, because he was careful, almost reverent. He applied the pus like a healer, wrapped it again with fresh cloth, and only then did she notice his own forearm was gashed open deep and ugly. She pointed, grunted, raised her eyebrows in challenge. He looked at it and shrugged like it didn't matter. He was bleeding, but still chose to heal her. First, she didn't understand it, couldn't process it. All her training, all her warnings. Humans are violent, selfish, dangerous, but this one, he bled for her, carried her, fed her, and never demanded anything in return. He wasn't treating her like food, and he definitely wasn't treating her like the enemy that evening. She beckoned him closer, pointed at herself. "EVF," as she said her name. He blinked, touched his chest, then paused, pointed at her again. Via left clumsy pronunciation, but he tried. She smiled slightly, then pointed at him, raised her brows. He touched his chest, said something she didn't catch, low and smooth with a strong beat to their syllables. "Towel," she repeated. "A towel." He smiled. It was small but real. For their first time she felt her fear crack just a little. The others had noticed children approached her platform. Now one brought her a carved wooden lizard. She took it slowly, smiled. The child laughed and ran off. Women gave her more clothing, decorative wrappings and beads. One placed a woven garland of deep red flowers in her hair. Not decoration, not foration. It was welcome. She didn't understand it, but she didn't resist it. She remembered her own ship, how her commander had screamed for her to eject alone, how the others had already fled before the crash. They didn't wait, didn't care. They weren't cruel, just efficient, emotionless. Her value ended with her usefulness, but these humans, they didn't calculate her worth, they just helped. That night, as jungle drums echoed softly and bioluminescent flowers pulsed with color beneath the moonlight, Tar sat beside her again, not close, just near enough to make her feel safe. He handed her roasted fruit wrapped in a leaf. She accepted it with both hands, and when their fingers brushed, she didn't flinch. She met his eyes and whispered, "And not food, not enemy." He didn't understand their words, but the way he smiled told her he understood the meaning. It happened on the fourth night. She had been healing well, too well. The swelling in her leg had gone down. The wounds still burned, but she could stand, move, limp, even run if she had to, and her instincts screamed, "Now's the time," because this couldn't be real. The kindness, the care, the food, the shelter, the warmth, it felt too good, too safe, too human. "They're fattening me up, waiting until I'm strong enough to scream again, then they'll feast." She'd seen it before on other planets. Tribes that raised their prey with affection, let them feel safe, even loved, until their fire was lit and the knives came out. Dow hadn't touched her, hadn't hurt her, but that didn't mean he wouldn't. The night was humid and thick with insects. The fire pits had died down. Most of their tribe had gone to sleep, lulled by distant drums and the humming jungle. She rose slowly, biting her lip to keep from gasping. Her leg screamed in protest. She ignored it, wrapped a vine strap around her thigh for support, tied with one of the cloth wraps they gifted her. Then she slipped off the platform and into the jungle. No one stopped her, no one called out, "Not yet." She moved like a shadow between the trees. Leaves kissed her skin, roots tore at her feet, but she moved fast. Quiet years of survival training kicking in. Just keep running, get far enough, trigger a distress beacon, get off this cursed planet. She made it maybe half a mile before the jungle turned. First came the scent, heavy, wet, rotten, then the sound, something dragging across bark, something big. Her heart stuttered, then froze. Yellow eyes blinked open in the dark, 8 of them. A low chittering noise came next. Branches cracked, leaves trembled, and then it moved. A jungle predator the size of a hoverbike with chameleon skin and limbs like spiked vines. It dropped from the canopy, silent and sudden. She ran, limped Fell scrambled again, her leg gave out, she screamed, the thing lunged and was intercepted by Dow. He burst through the foliage like a storm bare-chested spear. Already raised, eyes glowing with fury, he didn't hesitate, didn't speak, just roared. And through the spear with terrifying precision it slammed into the creature's neck, but didn't kill it, only enraged it. It turned toward him, hissing, bleeding, furious, and he ran right at it. She watched paralyzed as the two tangled in the underbrush. Tar ducked under claws, drove a knife into its side, rolled clear, then stabbed again. Blood splattered there. Vines, the creature shrieked. Dow grabbed a burning root from the ground and shoved it into its open mouth. A final screech, a thrash, and silence. He stood over a panting, chesting, then turned to her, not angry, not triumphant, just tired and disappointed. He approached slowly. She couldn't move, could barely breathe. Blood soaked his arm, a long cut across his chest glistened in the moonlight. He dropped to one knee beside her and didn't say a word, just reached for her gently as if asking again, a may I? She nodded through tears, and he lifted her, cradled her, held her like something sacred. He carried her all the way back through the twisting jungle, through vines and mud and blood. The stars watched in silence, the moon followed. No one else saw, just them back in the village. He cleaned her wounds without speaking, tied the wrap tighter around her leg, rebandaged her chest, made sure she had water and warmth, then sat beside her, head bowed, hands trembling. She stared at him, at the bruises blooming across his ribs, at the deep claw mark across his shoulder, at the spear broken in half, all to save her from a jungle that would have devoured her without blinking. She didn't know his words, but she knew what he said with his eyes. You don't trust me, I understand, but I'll keep saving you anyway. She reached out, placed her green hand on his chest over his heart, and whispered, broken and soft, I'm sorry. His head lifted, his expression softened, and finally he smiled. She didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, but because something had shifted inside her. Not food, not prisoner, not even guest. He had saved her again. And this time she didn't want to run. The fire crackled between them, casting golden light across the wide clearing above. The stars blinked through their jungle canopy, dozens of them, unfamiliar shapes in unfamiliar skies. But tonight she wasn't looking up, she was looking at him, Tal, the man who had saved her twice. Without speaking a single word, she understood. He sat on the other side of the fire, cleaning his knife with a strip of vine. The gash across his shoulder had been wrapped with a medicinal paste that glowed faintly. The wound was deep, but he hadn't complained. She traced her fingers over the bandage on her own thigh. It was clean, firm, done by someone who had hands used to protecting, not harming. She hadn't tried to run again, not because she was too weak, but because she finally believed he never meant to hurt her. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the crackling fire and the soft hum of insects. She finally picked up a piece of charcoal from the edge of the pit and pressed it against a flat stone. Dow watched her curiously. She drew clumsily, shakily, a stick figure with long hair, then pointed at herself. Va left. She drew another, taller, broader, and pointed at him. He nodded, then touched his chest. Tal, they smiled. She added lines, stars above a tree, the jungle predator from the other night, clumsy with too many legs. She pointed to it, then mimed, biting with her hands. He laughed. It was deep, rough, warm. She laughed too, despite herself. Then he took the charcoal, drew beside her two stick figures, again hers and his, but now they stood side by side, not apart. One had its hand extended, the other was reaching back. She looked up at him. Dow smiled and nodded once, a slow, sure, no words, just meaning, and that was more powerful than any language. He passed her a piece of cooked root. She took it without fear. Their hands touched just briefly, but something in that contact was different. Intentional, not protective, not accidental. She didn't pull away, and neither did he. They ate together in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't weigh heavy but feels full, full of everything they couldn't say yet. Over the next few days they made a habit of it. Each night after the village settled, they met at the fire. She taught him her words: tree hurt, safe, thank you. He taught Her his patient and slow fire water. Night friend, the words weren't always correct, the grammar was a mess, but their effort was everything. She learned his people weren't just warriors, they were healers, builders, protectors of their forest. They lived with it, not on top of it. She had come from a world of metal, of order, of logic, but here everything breathed, everything mattered. Tao showed her the glowing plants that only bloomed under certain stars, the birds that mimic voices, the fruit that cured sickness if harvested at dawn and poisoned if taken at night. Jungle teach, he said once, then tapped his temple. You listen, jungle answer. She found herself looking for him during the day, not just out of habit, but because he made her feel seen. She felt less like a wounded animal and more like herself, more like someone worth saving, not because of what she offered, but because of who she was becoming. One night, while drawing by the fire again, she asked why he looked confused. She pointed at herself, then at the claw marks still healing on his chest. Why? Help me. He didn't answer at first, just stared into the fire. Then he whispered, because alone is worse than death. He looked at her eyes, deep, dark, full of things he still couldn't say in her language. You were alone, so I stayed. She blinked, felt her throat tighten. Her people wouldn't have said that, her commander would have called that weak, irrational, foolish, but here in the firelight, it was the strongest thing she'd ever heard. That night, as the fire burned low, she didn't return to her platform. She stayed beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. They watched their jungle breathe together, two creatures from different worlds, not lovers, not enemies, not yet anything to find, just two souls who understood each other. Without needing to speak, she waited until the sun had dipped low, turning the jungle sky to molten gold. The fire crackled between them again. It had become their ritual. Sit close, eat in silence, share drawings and words and smiles. But tonight something weighed on her chest, heavier than hunger, heavier than fear, a question, one she had tried to bury, but not tonight. He passed her a carved fruit, sliced open and filled with soft orange pulp. She took it, set it down, then looked at him. Tal. He turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes. She pointed at herself, then at her old leg wound, then at the sky where the jungle predator had come from, then at him. She mimed the spear, throw the blood, the pain, then pointed again at her chest. Why? Her voice cracked. Why? Save me. Dao's eyes dropped to the fire. He poked at a glowing coal with a stick, thoughtful. The flames flickered on his dark skin, dancing along old scars she'd never noticed before, some faded, some fresh. When he finally looked back at her, his voice was low, careful, like he was choosing every word from deep inside himself. Before you came, he said, pausing between words, I lost one. She tilted her head slightly. He mimed a small figure, a child, then mime carrying, then fire, then nothing. Her chest tightened. A daughter, a sister, a student. It didn't matter. He lost someone, and no one had saved them. Dao continued, too late, too far. He tapped his chest over his heart. I run, I fight, but no save. His eyes were damp, but his voice never broke. Then I see you, same look, same pain. He reached out, didn't touch her, but pointed at the exact place above her heart. I see you, so I stay. It wasn't a grand speech, but it landed like thunder. She blinked hard, tears rimmed her emerald eyes, not because of their words, but because of what they meant. He didn't save her because she was special. He saved her because she reminded him of someone who had died, because he had failed once and refused to fail again. He didn't expect thanks, didn't want worship. He just refused to let someone else suffer alone. That was all, and somehow that was everything. She leaned forward, speaking slowly, trembling, my people, they don't stop for the weak. If you fall behind, you are forgotten. She stared into the fire. I was forgotten. Dao listened in silence. She continued, when I saw you, I thought you would eat me. A small laugh escaped her throat. It was bitter, ashy. I thought no one helps without a reason. Tar's brow furrowed. Reason is heart. He tapped his chest again, not rule. Her hand trembled as she reached across the fire. He met her halfway, fingers touched, held. Not out of romance, but recognition. For a long time they just sat like that. No jungle, no war, no tribe, just a woman who had never been seen and a man who refused to let her disappear. Later that night, she lay beside him, not touching, but close enough to feel his warmth through the fire-lit dark. She whispered his name, he whispered hers back, not as a title, not as property, just as someone real. Devoured left, she realized something terrifying. She no longer wanted to leave, and if her people came for her now, she wasn't sure she would go above them. A breeze stirred the tall trees, the fire crackled, leaves whispered secrets to the wind, and two people who had started as predator and prey fell asleep beside one another with no guards, no weapons, and no fear, because in the end the reason he saved her was the reason she stayed. It started with a sound, a low rumble in the sky, foreign and cold, not thunder, not wind engines. Tar stopped mid-sentence during one of their lessons. His eyes narrowed, his shoulders tensed. VF's heart dropped. She knew that sound, knew their formation of the shadow that moved across the tree canopy. Her people had found her. The drop ship broke through the trees with surgical precision, its undercarriage lined with flickering lights and telescopic scanners. It landed like a mechanical beast, flattening everything around it. Branches cracked, animals scattered, children screamed and hid, and from its belly emerged them sleek armor, sharp eyes, weapons humming with plasma. Her people, her command team, high-caste officers with polished insignia and expressions carved from stone. She stood frozen near the fire pit, Toad just behind her. His hand hovered near the carved dagger at his waist, but he didn't draw. He watched, measured. He didn't need translation to recognize a threat. A female officer stepped forward, her voice barked out in their shared language. VF scholar class, you are recovered, you will return. It wasn't a question. VF felt her spine straighten, instinctively drilled from years of discipline, but she didn't move. Her eyes flicked to toe. His face was unreadable, but his jaw was tight. She turned back. A return for what? As she asked, your debrief, your DNA logs, your instant statement? The officer snapped. You're still under science regulation and caste lore. You are not cleared for unsupervised Teresa's contact. She blinked. Unsupervised Teresa's contact, that's what they thought. This was a breach of protocol. The officer looked past her. At Dow sneered, you've been compromised.